So I think we can now start the meeting. So good evening, everyone, and namaskar to all. So today we are having the 11th Professor Kshetra Pattnaik Memorial Lecture, and we have with us Professor Sushanta Mallick. I'll be giving a little introduction to Professor Mallick after a short while, and so I request the President of Odisha Economic Association, Professor Abhinaran Patra, to preside over this meeting. And before I invite him to speak, let me first speak a few things about Professor Kshetra Pattnaik. In fact, his son, Professor Dr. Sushanta Pattnaik, also is online with us. Professor Kshetra Pattnaik was born on May 10th, 1928, on Thursday, in Chhatrapur, Ganjam district of Odisha, and he passed away on May 8, 1999. And if you look at his education and all, then he completed his higher secondary education from Anslo Institution, Chhatrapur, and intermediate from Maharaja College, Paralakamundi, and then BA from again same Maharaja's College, Paralakamundi, then MA in Economics from MA in Economics from Banaras Hindu University in 1949. He was actually first in his batch, and then he did Master of Arts from Stanford University, USA in 1958. Then he obtained his PhD for his thesis Monetary Policy and Economic Development in India in 1965. And he had a long career starting from 1949 as a lecturer in Jaipur College, Koraput, then Mohan College, Revensa College, and then Director of Public Institution. And then he was Under Secretary to Government of Odisha, Finance Department. And he was leader in Economics in 1963 in Revensa College, Professor of Economics in Revensa College in 1970, and then Gangadhar Meher College. And then he was also a member of the Committee for Additional Resource Generation for the state in 1983. He was appointed by Government of Odisha to prepare the Odisha Education Code in 1970. And he retired from government service in 1986. In fact, many of us would be knowing that actually he had authored actually the English to Odia dictionary along with B.K. Tripathi and Kalyani Samantrai. So three people had edited that. Oxford, it was published by Oxford English Odia dictionary. So that is actually in brief about Professor Kshetra Pattnaik. And then with that brief note about Professor Kshetra Pattnaik, I would request the President of Odisha Economic Association to have his welcome remarks. Over to you, sir. Professor Abhinaran.
Thank you, Manindra. I have the privilege of welcoming all to this Professor Kshetra Pattnaik Memorial Lecture. I welcome Sushanta to deliver the memorial lecture. I wish to share few of my experiences with Professor Kshetra Pattnaik. I was a student at Revensa from 1977 to 1979. In our first year, Kshetra Pattnaik was teaching us macroeconomics, and he used the period that was just before the recess. That time we enjoyed a recess. but Professor Kshetra Pattnaik would take his period plus the recess, and the students would be very eagerly listening to his lectures. This was Kshetra Pattnaik. He was teaching macroeconomics in the MA first year and development economics in MA second year. He was a brilliant teacher, and few things that were very notable about him was that he got a scholarship from Maharaja Pallakemundi, with which he could have his intermediate science and bachelor's degree from. Then he met Gorvasi Pattnaik, who was who later became the chief secretary of, chief engineer in chief government of Odisha. Gorvasi Pattnaik told him, persuaded him rather, to go to PhU, Banaras Hindu University, to which Professor Pattnaik obliged, and he went to Banaras. So he thought of studying at Patna and ultimately landed in Banaras Hindu University, where he had his teacher, Professor Amiyo Dasgupta, who was a brilliant teacher of his age, was a teacher to Professor Amartya Sen also. And then he completed his post-graduation from BHU and joined Vikram Dal College, Jaipur. From Jaipur, he went to Fakirmohan College, Baleshwar, and then from Fakirmohan College, Baleshwar to Revensa. He was selected on a scholarship at Netherlands School of Economics to have his PhD at the Netherlands School of Economics. But he was forced to forego because he preferred his family and teaching responsibilities to doing a PhD. Then, after some 1 or 2 years, he was again selected, got government scholarship to read at Stanford University, where he did AM, but could not continue for PhD because the parents fell ill. He again gave a precedence to his family. So although he had good teachers, very excellent teachers at Stanford, like Professor Kenneth J. Arrow and Hollis Chenery, and he has very intimate friends, Ujawa and B.S. Vinas. So he got his stay there and came back to Odisha. So this is Professor Kshetra Pattnaik, who was very dutiful, who was very honest, who was very straightforward, and during his career as a teacher, as an educational administrator, it was very difficult to say anything before him. I remember when I was a student, we used to celebrate, solemnize Ganesh Puja and Saraswati Puja. Students would be afraid to take prasad to his house. And in 2 years, in both my MA Part 1 and MA Part 2, I was almost forced to, I was a villager, I came from a village, so I was easily persuaded and induced. I took the challenge of taking Prasad to his house. I had another very interesting experience with him. I was staying in New PG hostel. He was a professor then. A few miscreants from Patrabazar came to the hostel. They were creating nuisance every day. One day, I was not allowed to go to the toilet. That was the situation. So then I ran to his house, Professor Pattnaik's house. He was the principal. He said that I was very vociferous in my words about not having a hostel built there before having a boundary wall. Nobody listened to me, and this is the situation. Anyway, he could settle this during his principalship at Ravensa. He was very strong-minded rather. Whatever he would say would be carried out. It was simply an instruction and order from him. That is the situation. That is Professor Kshetra Mohan Pattnaik. His words are simply, if a student is seriously listening to his class, that was enough to sit in the examination. That was Professor Kshetra Mohan Pattnaik. So this is all about Kshetra Mohan Pattnaik. I would now request Dr. Amrendra Das to introduce today's speaker, Professor Sushanta Mallick.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Sushant Mallick, who is going to talk on R&D, local and foreign knowledge spillover and firm performance. Professor Sushant Mallick is currently working at, or he's a professor of international finance at the School of Business and Management, Queen Mary University of London, UK. Since 2015, he has been the co-editor-in-chief of Economic Modeling, which is a leading 40-year-old scholarly journal published by Elsevier. He also acts as a co-editor-in-chief of Journal of Economic Surveys, which is a 35-year-old journal published by Wiley, and a co-editor of the Economic Analysis and Policy, which is again 54-year-old journal published by the Economic Society of Australia. He holds a PhD degree in economics from the University of Warwick, UK. Before joining Queen Mary in October 2006, he held position at the Department of Economics, Dover University, then UK, and Royal Institute of International Affairs, London, JP Morgan Chase, previously known as Chase Manhattan Bank, and then based in Hong Kong, and Institute for Social and Economic Change, ISEC, and with a year at Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore, in India, where he began his research career, followed by a Commonwealth Scholarship to study for a PhD in economics at the University of Warwick in UK. He gained his undergraduate degree in economics with first-class honors and distinction from Utkal University, Bhadra College, before studying for his master's degree in economics at the University of Hyderabad in southern India with first class. He then worked for 4 years at the Indian Council of Social Science Research Institute in Bangalore, that is ISEC Bangalore, and including a year at ISI Bangalore. And then he moved to Warwick in 1995 to undertake his doctoral research funded by the Commonwealth Scholarship. Then, in addition to publishing a book from his PhD research by Routledge in 1999, he has contributed articles to 15 edited volumes, along with publishing widely in many international referred journals. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles focused on issues in the areas of international macroeconomics, banking and finance, and innovation and development. He has researched different aspects of international finance and development at both macro and microeconomic levels, as well as monetary and financial issues. His published research includes issues connected with growth and development. He has also carried out a substantial amount of work on various aspects of macroeconomic modeling. And as per ID's ranking, he is among the top 5% economists of the world. He has over 6,000 Google Scholar citation with a H index of 45, so half a century, H index almost. And his work has been published in journals such as British Journal of Management, Research Policy, Economic Theory, Journal of Corporate Finance, European Journal of Operational Research, Journal of Banking and Finance, Industrial Relations, British Journal of Industrial Relations, and IMF Economic Review, Journal of International Money and Finance, Cambridge Journal of Economics, World Development, and so on. So a list of is published. Now you can see actually on the website, and yeah. So with that, how much research he has done. So with that introduction of the speaker, now let me invite Professor Sushanta Mallick to deliver his talk in honor of Professor Kshetra Pattnaik. Over to you, sir. Now you can share your PPT.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Amarendra, for a kind introduction. I would also like to thank Patra sir and other colleagues at Odisha Economic Association. At the beginning, I must say that it's indeed a great honor and a privilege to be delivering this lecture in memory of Professor K.M. Pattnaik. Of course, all of you have already mentioned that, your experiences. Professor Patra sir mentioned about his experience with, knowing Professor K.M. Pattnaik very closely. Of course, in my case, I never had an opportunity to meet him, but, from starting from our college, we know about his work. I think he had many textbooks which we used to refer when we were in college, I think undergraduate, even plus 2 level. So I think today I received this email which I really liked from Sri Vijay Bose, which was quite informative in terms of his recollections about Professor Pattnaik. I think one idea which was very interesting there was this is something he had, Professor Pattnaik had in mind, how there could be transformation from soft state to a modern state. This is the way he visualized the India could become, could achieve economic modernization. But at the root of economic modernization, or to achieve that, there is this need for technological innovation. This is something which is being emphasized quite well in the current policy regimes for last 10 years. And my focus is going to be on that, on technological innovation, how it can drive growth, which is very important. Whichever country has achieved growth, high-speed growth, they all relied on technological innovation. So to achieve that, R&D is the key. So R&D is an input. Research and development is an input, and that can generate high-quality products. Therefore, you have higher rate of growth, and hence you have higher level of development. Higher level of development will not come automatically, but to achieve that, there are many other dimensions, but I'm going to focus only on this as part of this lecture, which I think would be a fitting tribute to Professor K.M. Pattnaik's contributions to economics and his the way he has shaped minds of many scholars over the years. Okay, even if people nowadays also they would know who he was and so on, even if they have not had the opportunity to learn from him directly. So the every country invests in research and development to grow faster and achieve growth. But there is, there are also countries, those who are firms, those who don't invest in R&D, but still they can achieve, they can derive spillover. Okay, so you can either you invest in R&D that will help your growth, or you could rely on others doing R&D, and you could achieve benefits or externalities with spillover from. This is what is called knowledge diffusion. So I'm going to focus on both the R&D and its diffusion. It could be happening locally within a country, or it could be happening outside the country. So that's what we call foreign knowledge spillover, and how it impacts firm performance and so on. So let me just give you a brief outline to the lecture. And I would be drawing some of the ideas from my published work. So first, I am going to take stock of the key issues in the literature on innovation and firm performance. And before going into firm level performance, I'll just give you an outline of the literature, how it has developed over time. And this idea knowledge spillover, when we say, and this became important, I think, with a paper in 1995, which was published in European Economic Review, Helpman and another of his co-authors. So they were looking at aggregate data at that time. You didn't have so much of micro level data sets to analyze this at that time. So the focus was more at the aggregate level, trying to identify, how knowledge can get transmitted from one country to another. The way they kind of established in that paper is to show it was through imports, when countries are engaging with other countries in terms of imports, importing from those countries, they get spillover, knowledge spillover. When countries are allowing foreign investment to come into their country, that's another way they can achieve knowledge or derive knowledge transfer or knowledge spillover from other countries. Okay, so this is a paper which we did in the beginning, where we looked at this aggregate, not so much aggregate, but at industry level, we looked at knowledge transmission, but within OECD countries. And this, I will just give a brief background to the literature, and then move on to more micro level, firm level data sets, where intellectual capital is important. So the countries with higher level of intellectual capital would grow faster, right? But at the same time, there is also a financing constraint. So not everybody can get access to financing. So we looked at, finance is going to sometimes, even if you have better access to financing, too much of finance is also bad. It has been established in the literature. So we try to see whether, innovative firms, even they have high level of leverage or borrowing, they could still mitigate the adverse effects of a high leverage and achieve better performance. This is we'll look at data, different types of intellectual assets here. And then finally, this is on India, actually. I will go on to, this is for the UK. And data here, it's on India, because there is not a lot of work on looking at innovation in India. So that's why we thought it is important to see, because a lot of the innovation that was taking place like 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, it was more happening, like public R&D, not so much private R&D. Therefore, there was so much focus on imitation and so on. But right now, this has changed. Now there is a lot of focus on innovation, technological startups, and so on. India has gone up, climbed up significantly in terms of global innovation index ranking. So there are a lot of things happening. So in that context, although we have the data set we used here in this paper, and we looked at data, and that is until 2014. Okay, so this data set, but still gives an idea as to to whether there is a spillover within the country, meaning across within an industry or between industries, intra or inter-industry transmission of knowledge. So whether there is any evidence in favor of that knowledge transmission within industries or between industries. So we show that the reason why we looked at that, because there is no statistically significant evidence even in OECD countries with regard to domestic knowledge transfer. So that's why we looked at this data along with my co-authors. Some of these papers are developed with my students. And so there are some other papers, but let me just give you a brief background, why you were interested in this. And there is a lot of these advanced countries were growing rapidly, and they were able to do so with higher level of productivity growth. Okay. And, but there is a concept called productivity paradox. Why is it, you would think when there is so much of technological innovation, why productivity growth is declining or stagnating around the world? So if you look at data from 92 to 2007, there was like on average a positive trend in productivity. Here, this data is ILO, meaning labor productivity, you could think, not total factor productivity. And there was a trend of increase in productivity growth. Countries which were achieving that, they were growing faster, right? That we have seen. And you can see this top line, which is like upper middle income countries. A lot of these emerging economies will come in that category. And they were growing much faster because of high productivity growth with the help of technology. But after the global financial crisis, there has been this decline in productivity growth around the world, including those upper and middle income countries. And I don't have this data after that. But this is the kind of trend, and obviously we know in 2020 it all collapsed, growth collapsed, and so on. And now the countries are slowly recovering in the post-pandemic years. So even if this is aggregate, but even if we look at for individual countries, you can see for the same 91 to 2007, and you can see China and India at the top of this list of countries. Okay, they were achieving higher level of productivity growth. China like 20%, India around 6.4% productivity growth, labor productivity, and which actually even the same, the ranking actually didn't change much, even if you look at 2010 to 2017, post-global financial crisis period. So we find China, still having higher rate of productivity growth, followed by India, and so on. A lot of these advanced countries hardly have any productivity growth. That's why there is thinking in, particularly if you look at the UK is basically not growing. And so it's the one thing is productivity growth has stagnated since 2007-8. And there is a discussion about why there is a productivity collapse in the UK. And I have a paper on this in the British Journal of Management on that. We looked at a different idea there, and to look at this cohort effect, whether there is, new firms were more constrained, and we found evidence in support of that. And so basically, to summarize, in a lot of these advanced countries, they are not able to have high rate of productivity growth, which probably they had 20, 30 years ago. And we can see that now. Let's look at this global innovation index. I put this slide just to kind of give you a sense what is happening now. And so it's 2014 and to 2023. And so these are the major countries which are actually in the global innovation index. And let's look at India. A lot of the advanced countries you can see here, UK, US, and so on, they're kind of, there is not much change. 2014, 2019, 2023, they were the global innovation index, they are there where they were before, so there is not much change. Where the change is coming out, basically, China and India, you could see. China, of course, these numbers are not clear. China is it's climbed up significantly. This is China, it's climbed up significantly. Whereas India, still, it used to have around 2014, used to have 80th rank in the Global Innovation Index. Today, it's a 40th rank. Okay, so it's climbed up many places. But still, it's happening at a slow pace, which could improve given the way it is, way the innovation is taking place. It could go up even further, and that's something we have to wait and see. But there is room for a higher level of innovation-led development, one could think of. So why this has become important? Why innovation? Because it was among Indian policymakers also. In many emerging market economies, there was low innovation, low productivity growth. That was an area of major concern. And so the goal was to increase productivity in order to achieve higher level of industry or firm level growth. And so basically, if we want to have higher level of growth or sustained rate of growth, we need the research and development. So these activities were not happening so much in the past. Firms were not investing in R&D. There was only people were relying on any spillover within or out from outside the country. So in order to achieve sustained growth, we need intensive R&D activities or knowledge diffusion that can actually improve productivity. Okay, so you can produce more than what you put in terms of inputs like labor, capital, and so on, material. So that's when you can actually be more competitive, you can reduce the cost of production, and therefore you have a higher level of growth and expansion and so on. So we want to, I would like to focus on in this lecture that first I will present some industry level analysis, and then I'll go on to firm level analysis. And so the industry level, we can look at within industry R&D activity as well as spillover from other industries, and that could, drive this, firm level growth or industry level growth. So there are, this is the important paper which I was mentioning, Helpman, Gross-Helpman, and its co-author here. This was the first initial paper on this topic where they used aggregate data, between countries, imports and FDI and so on. So these papers actually only focus a spillover can occur between countries, okay, not so much within a country. So this kind of setup, they did not include that intra-nation, intranational or domestic spillover. So this is something we looked at in this OECD data set in the first paper, where there is a that twofold role of knowledge, which suggests that industries exploit benefits either from their own R&D or the R&D effort of other nations. Okay, countries do their own R&D. Sometimes it's driven by public R&D, not so much private in developing countries, and there could be they could derive that new knowledge from other countries, which means that that is the R&D effort of other nations. So this ultimately is the knowledge stock that drives productivity in an individual country. So how this can happen, how it is going to translate into higher level of growth. And so there are two ways this knowledge can get transmitted. What are those two channels? One is trade. When a country engages in trade with other countries, they learn how the other country is doing. So therefore, they get access to that information or knowledge stock in that country that enables them to produce those goods at a lower cost, right? So which probably the importing country is not able to produce at a lower cost, and hence they don't find it competitive to do so, and therefore they import. Similarly, there has been a lot of focus in the last 20, 30 years about encouraging foreign investors to come in, because they come in with their technology that can help them to produce at a lower cost when the labor is cheap in these developing countries, including India. Okay, so it all depends on the extent to which knowledge is publicly available, and that will determine. So people, those who are trading, or firms, those who are trading with their international partners, they will gain that knowledge. Others would not. Okay, but still there could be transmission from people, those who are receiving that, and through that others, those who have interaction with those domestic partners, they can gain that knowledge. So knowledge, you would think within a country, knowledge is publicly available. Therefore, domestic spillover is not important. Probably that's the reason why these papers, they did not look at that issue. But we felt that it's important that we need to investigate this with the including that domestic spillover that could be happening within a country across industries. So we had a standard setup where our goal was to include this knowledge spillover, okay, and that could drive productivity. Everybody is familiar with this production function. I don't want to go into the details. And this is the productivity that we are talking about. And we'll try to write out an equation for this total factor productivity, and then we'll look at some of these, R&D and knowledge spillover driving this productivity. Okay, this is exogenous technological change, and we write this equation here. Yeah, this is one is total factor productivity, and which is going to be driven by human capital in a country. Then stock of human capital, education is the key variable that could reflect that human level of human capital in the country. Then you have research and development, and you have domestic knowledge spillover. Okay, and then you have an international stock of knowledge or international knowledge spillover. Okay, so these are my focus is going to be on these, right? Human capital, everybody knows they are important, and so we will focus on these in the three factors, and we'll use here in this paper we have used the OECD data, okay, to understand this industry knowledge spillovers. So this is the same equation here. And the key parameters of interest are this beta. This is the total physical capital stock, and this is human capital. This is You have this is materials. So this is R is research and development, domestic spillover, and knowledge spillover, international knowledge spillover. Okay, and so these two parameters are going to reflect the extent of knowledge spillovers. This is local by local channel. This is from international, so spillover from other countries to a particular country. Okay, and we will see whether this local spillover is statistically significant, or if it is not, you would say, well, probably, anything that exists within a country is publicly available. The information is not new, the knowledge is not new. Therefore, it would not matter for improving productivity, right? And I don't want to go through the details, how this is constructed and so on. And this is kind of perpetual inventory method, which is normally used to compute this R&D stock. And we can look at that R&D stock to construct a pool of national or domestic spillovers. Okay, by using this weight, how different industries are linked in terms of their inter-industry transactions, and which could be used in order to compute this, or the extent to which you will have interaction depends on how much, what is the extent of trade or extent of purchase from between those two industries. That's kind of used as weight here to compute the domestic spillover. And then and this paper, the first paper, which focused on knowledge spillover can take place only through imports. Then subsequent papers actually came up with this. No, there can be also FDI related spillover, foreign direct investment. When they come into a country, they sometimes they bring in technology and they bring in knowledge that could be used to produce the same thing at a probably lower cost. And therefore, they become competitive in producing those goods in the international market. Okay, so, and there are also papers subsequently looking at different types of FDI, vertical, horizontal, and so on. Okay, so horizontal meaning is the same industry. FDI is coming from the foreign country to the domestic country, and then you have also FDI could be coming to vertical FDI to a different industry. Okay. And so how do we measure, this international spillover, which we say international knowledge spillover? There are many ways it can be done. So we have 4 different ways here. So basically, this is the knowledge stock. Okay, I'll explain one, and the others I'll just skip, and we can look at the paper, which those who are interested in. So there is this knowledge stock in a particular industry, and the extent to which a particular country is trading with a foreign country. So that the extent of that trade will determine how much spillover there could be for the importing country. So, okay, so what we do is here we take the bilateral import share between country C and country F. This is the domestic country importing goods. It could be all kinds of imports, capital imports and other types of imports. And this is a foreign country. So this is, you see, the knowledge stock that is created in a foreign country. That knowledge stock is getting transmitted to the country who is importing. So this is the extent of share, like how much you are importing from a foreign country. That would determine what would be the extent of spillover of that knowledge stock that is created outside the country would get reflected in terms of foreign or international knowledge spillover. Okay, so this is the sending country, and this is the receiving country. Okay, similarly, I mean, the way we define this is just by looking at the bilateral import share would not be sufficient. It won't capture the extent to which you are getting knowledge. So it depends on the import intensity in a particular industry, you know. So that's why we looked at not just the bilateral share, but look at the import intensity, and that would really reflect, that would be a true reflection of the extent of import penetration in the recipient country receiving knowledge spillover. Okay, so we use kind of a different types of um, these indices. We measure it in four different ways. How knowledge stock can get transmitted to the foreign, to a domestic economy, to the importing country. We also, at the end, we had similar indices we constructed with the FDI related spillovers. Okay, so so knowledge, so there are two ways: knowledge embodied in imports that would enable knowledge transmission to an importing country. Also, the FDI receiving country can also receive a knowledge transfer from a foreign country. Okay, so these are some of the industries we had in the paper, and these are only OECD countries here. Okay, so our goal was just to include this domestic knowledge spillover, right? This is something where the other papers did not include. And so we thought, you know, there could be, the estimates could be biased, you know, this is the international spillover because you are not including domestic spillover. That was the key motivation to do this analysis using this OECD level data. So what we see here, you know, these other things will be important: capital stock and material and education. These things are important. It has been well established. We don't have to get into that. So another, the key dimension that would drive productivity growth is this knowledge stock and the extent of knowledge spillover from other industries or other countries. Okay, so that's the main goal. You can see here it's kind of this domestic spillover is sometimes significant, sometimes not. There is no, you know, I'll show you more results whether really it remains significant all the time. And but international spillover, one thing you find, regardless of the way you estimate, and so these different types of spillover, okay, they are always important in explaining variations in productivity across industries. So which we don't see with regard to domestic spillover. Then we looked at, you know, separating them into high tech and low tech. High tech group of industries and low tech group of industries. Here you can see these are high tech, right? High technology intensive industries and low technology intensive industries. And you find, and let's just focus on this. These things are always going to be important. This domestic spillover, meaning what I call in the title local spillover, and this is international spillover. I've just presented one table, but this can be changed, ISP1 and ISP2, 3, 4, and so on. So different ways you can measure international knowledge spillover. So what we see here that, you know, it's not statistically significant, this domestic spillover. But in case of international spillover, there is a very prominent effect of that knowledge transfer that is happening between countries in the same industry, okay? But it's not so much apparent when we look at the extent of knowledge transfer within a country, and whether it's Of course, they don't. In this paper, we don't look at intra and inter, right? Between. So it's just like an aggregate knowledge stock index here, domestic knowledge stock, in terms of inter-industry transactions. Okay, there is no intra, but you would call it like something like inter, between industry transactions. So what can we say? That we see that international knowledge transfer or knowledge transmission is always statistically significant, but domestically it's not quite prominent. It's statistically insignificant, depending on the and depending on the industry you look at. So then we looked at this FDI spillover. And we find that FDI spillover is mainly export linked, and that's a very when we look at this, international spillover across different with different types of different measures of international knowledge spillover, they are always statistically significant, but we don't see that in. Look at this. This domestic spillover is statistically insignificant. So this is one point which I want to develop further as to why this local spillover is not statistically significant within these OECD countries. Okay, and this was the main reason why we thought it's important to look at within industry and between industry to explore this idea further. Okay, and this is why I'm presenting this, because my goal is to kind of take this argument forward. So I just to explain these results we did, before I go to that, just to explain these results, we looked at these countries, the ease of doing business, or the extent to which there is this intellectual property rights protection. IP protection is very important, which is lacking in countries where you have weak governance. Improvement in governance is very important if you want to encourage foreign investment to a country and to produce innovative products, right? So the strength of IPR protection is quite important, and that can help. So countries with better ease of doing business and stronger IPR protection, those countries can derive higher productivity gains when there are spillovers, knowledge spillovers, right? So what we see here is that different types of so we looked at ease of doing business. So once we control for that and the protection of IP protection, okay. So countries with better, like here you can see high low, yeah. Countries with the higher, better ease of doing business, they have some higher productivity. Similarly, higher level of better ease of doing business, and at the same time, if they have better IP protection, and those countries have higher productivity gains. You can see the other ones have lower productivity gains, right? So this is quite coming out quite prominently. So this is one way one could explain as to why, how there are productivity gains. It could be because of these two factors which make which explain variation in productivity gains. So just to summarize this idea, then I'll present. I hope I have a bit more time. So this the point I made here is that international knowledge spillovers are important. Different countries have different levels of edge in producing, and new knowledge is the key to produce competitive goods that could have a lower price or low cost of production, thereby lower price, and therefore everybody will buy from that country, right? We all know that from international trade. And so these knowledge spillovers are important because it can help other countries, see, to lower their cost of production, right? So there's nothing wrong with it, bringing knowledge from other countries to a country which lacks a stock of knowledge, or the countries which are not at the knowledge frontier, right? So they are important for output growth at the industry level and more so for the high-tech group. Okay, and so the knowledge and respective spillovers, knowledge stock and the related spillovers, they are not pure public goods, right? So not everybody can get access to. It can be accessible within a country. Probably everybody can get access to that. But still there are things which would be still hidden. It will not be publicly available. But if it is outside a country, you need to have some kind of transaction with those countries. Therefore, you can get access to that knowledge. So that international linkage is very important, like which country is doing what, right? And and so that would be the channel through which knowledge stock in other countries can get transferred to a particular low-income country. Okay, so the degree of import intensity matters, and domestic spillovers are also important, but they remain relatively less significant than international knowledge spillovers. So international knowledge stock can actually explain, or we say spillover because we look at the extent of linkages between countries. And so that can explain variations in productivity of a particular country. So this knowledge effect of inward FDI is stronger than the competitiveness effect of outward FDI. Therefore, the presence of multinationals in a domestic market can generate positive knowledge spillover, helping industry level growth. So one point which was not, we didn't have enough evidence to support this role of local knowledge spillover. So I would be presenting some results on that point using data, Indian data. So before I go to that, very quickly, I will present some ideas with regard to the role of intangibles in driving firm performance. And so with my student, we have looked at this, the role of intellectual capital, how it can actually mitigate the adverse effect of high leverage. Some firms are very highly leveraged, so they don't have enough room to borrow more. But if they are innovative firms, they could still be able to improve their performance in terms of profitability, productivity, and so on. So we found very interesting result here, which intangibles were highly overvalued before the global financial crisis in 2008-9. Before that, but after the global financial crisis, probably the true valuation of those intangibles became clear, and so there was a kind of a decline in the value of those intangibles. So if you do a regression of these intangibles in explaining firm level performance, you may find a negative effect. You would wonder why intangibles is a good thing. It should be improving performance in a for a firm. And but when we saw this is using UK data. So we saw and we tried to explain that, why there could be a negative correlation between intangibles and firm profitability. And so we found that it's basically the intangibles were overvalued before 2008. And after that, probably the true valuation. So what the valuation should be was kind of apparent from the data. And when you estimate only for the post-crisis period, you find that those intangibles do explain differences in company valuation across sectors. So, which means they have a positive effect. So intangibles do matter in explaining firm level valuations within a country. And so, but this was not the case. So if you are estimating pre-crisis data with post-crisis data, you will find a negative effect. And this is something we showed in this paper, that even firms, on top of that, we also looked at this firms which are highly leveraged, and those firms can also achieve greater valuation, improvement in valuation, and they can mitigate any valuation uncertainty if they are knowledge or high-tech intensive. And this is we showed it in this paper with regard to this uncertain times. We see decline in the firm performance, but during those uncertain times, if firms which are more innovative firms, they don't experience decline in performance, decline in profitability. Okay, so there are, these are some of the results which I thought of discussing. But one point which becomes more interesting for a developing country is that firms are more financially constrained, and they also suffer from weaker management practices, and that can be a drag on performance, right? Even despite greater innovation. So we looked at this dimension, financial constraints and managerial practices, and trying to see whether innovation intensity in the traditional sense, like R&D and intangibles. Okay, so and nowadays, Nicholas Bloom and others, they've been talking about this managerial practices, right, in the using US data. So there has been a lot of focus on better managerial practices, how that can help improve firm performance. And so we tried to look at this, financial constraint, innovation, and managerial practices and their effect using this Turkish firm level data to show that this managerial, if you can have effective innovation with the better managerial practices, that can help achieve higher level of performance for firms. So given they don't have a lot of time, hopefully maybe another 10 minutes I'll try to. Let me look at now data on some of these issues that I discussed here. There is not a lot of research looking at Indian data, okay? Because it was never important. That's why now people have not looked at this dimension very closely. And so you don't find many published papers on this topic. So we thought of using that, but again, the data I'm going to show you here, it stops in 2014. So it's very hard for me to reflect on what is happening today. Since 2014, there have been a lot of changes which have happened, but it's something which requires further investigation, which can be taken up by people on this. So let me just, what is the state of existing state of knowledge on this topic with regard to looking at Indian data? Because the one point which I showed in the beginning, that there is limited evidence on domestic knowledge spillover. And so the point, what I wrote in the title, that local knowledge spillover, that is what a domestic spillover, and there is limited evidence on that. We saw in OECD countries, it's not very statistically significant. And so we felt that it would be interesting to look at, because you need data for a single country to analyze that in greater detail, single country across firms. Therefore, if you can construct R&D stock for each industry, and you can each firm, I'm sorry, R&D stock for each firm, and then you can compute intra-industry knowledge stock for a particular firm and inter-industry knowledge stock for a particular firm, and they can see to what extent that is getting transmitted to a particular firm. Okay, so you need a firm level analysis. So people, we always think that knowledge is publicly available. Therefore, it's already factored in. It's already reflected in the valuation or performance of a firm. So now we don't need to do much about it. But it is possible that firms, those who do not invest in R&D, they could still benefit. This is what is like, you have to make a distinction between R&D performing firms and non-R&D performing firms. So firms, those who don't do R&D at all, but they could still derive knowledge transfer. They could benefit from that knowledge diffusion in the same industry or between industry, right? So we just put all the data that we have, and you find there is you can't say anything, right? Whether there is a positive or negative correlation, because it's all data points are scattered here. So we just try to correlate just to see if there is a positive correlation between the two. And these firms are different. We need to control for their different characteristics, observed and unobserved heterogeneity in the data, and which is very well known in the literature. And once we do that, we can see whether there is a positive or significant correlation between R&D knowledge stock and productivity. Okay, so I'm just showing the data here. So now when we computed this intra-industry knowledge spillover. The details actually are in the paper. I would encourage people, those who are interested in, to look at the paper. This is published in Research Policy, this paper. And so we calculated this intra-industry knowledge stock. Okay, then we used the extent of transactions with the extent of transactions to calculate this embodied and disembodied knowledge stock. Okay, so you can see here with the intra-industry, you kind of find a positive correlation, but there is significant variation across firms, right? And similar pattern, if you look at inter-industry knowledge stock, and there is a kind of seemingly positive correlation, weak though, and but we need to go deeper and try to look at the data, the estimates closely after controlling for the observed heterogeneity among firms and unobserved heterogeneity among firms. Once we have done that, clearly we can make that the coefficients more reliable and which can be interpretable. So here, let's see the R&D capital stock. We have all firms here. It's not statistically significant. When it's considered labor intensive, capital intensive, you find there is a positive correlation. And then we don't find much, even intra-industry, there is no correlation. So even there is negative correlation for all firms. But whereas with inter-industry, we find, capital intensive, and even all firms, probably it's driven by capital intensive. So we find there is a positive correlation between inter-industry knowledge stock and productivity for the entire sample, productivity of all firms, right? There is a positive correlation. Controlling for all kinds of, firm age, size, and the extent of leverage that each firm has, and the extent of imports, because you need to control for, there are firms that are importing, right, from overseas, and that imports is not really helping explain productivity differences between across firms, but even it has a negative effect also, even R&D. So import is a big cost, right? So it can reduce productivity. So we then looked at for whether knowledge-intensive firms produce higher quality goods that could enable non-knowledge-intensive firms to gain knowledge spillover, right? So we separated kind of non-R&D performing firms. Okay, so this regression we have done, we looked at the effect of all this spillover. See, these are non-R&D performing firms, meaning they don't do R&D. So therefore, R&D variable is not there because they have no R&D data. They don't do R&D. Those firms, if you look at only way they can benefit from, they can get knowledge transfer is through these intra-industry R&D. Basically, if they have intra-industry transactions, they will derive that knowledge transfer, and inter-industry transactions will determine knowledge transfer from other industries to the industry in which a particular firm is located. So you can see here inter-industry is quite, the effect is quite prominent, statistically significant throughout, regardless of the category we look at, which we do not find in case of intra-industry. The results are sensitive. Okay, so so then we looked at there are some other results. I'm just ignoring them, but just focusing on some important ones. I have one or two slides. I'll complete soon. So then we looked at, there have been a lot of changes in the intellectual property rights regime in India after 2005. Okay, so we thought of making that distinction, whether really that could help uncover something, which may be the entire data set, which starts from 1989 until 2014. That's a long period of time where many things have changed. So we separated the data set. Since 2005, this is post-IPR. This IPR regulations became, more rigid, and there were new IP laws which came into effect. And so that could have made a difference. And this point was actually mentioned by the referee of this paper. And so we had to do this, but it was very interesting here. You can see pre-IPR, it's no effect. R&D did not matter before 2005, right? And so, but post-IPR, so that means this tells you probably IPR had a role to play in driving innovation, which was not happening before 2005 because people are not sure about the IP law in India, right? And so we find that R&D stock is important because it's explaining the post-IPR productivity, and intra-industry, it doesn't really do much. It even reduces, but inter-industry is quite statistically significant, and so on. So that IPR regime could, I think, stronger. This point I mentioned earlier about the strength of IPR protection is very important if we want to have a knowledge transfer, and that could or new knowledge coming from overseas or even within a country. Protection is very important, and that will drive productivity differences, that would explain productivity differences across firms. And this is not very small, but I just want to make one point here about this. When a firm is import intensive, they're importing quite a lot overseas. If you are relying to produce goods, if you are relying on importing from overseas, and that can actually reduce your performance, right? Because you have a lot of outflows you have to incur. when you are importing materials and other, other inputs, including technology. So, but if those firms, if they are operating in an industry which receives higher level of FDI, okay, and those firms can still mitigate that adverse effect of import intensity. Okay, so we show that here in through interaction terms. You will see these firms exporting, mainly knowledge intensive exporting firms. They are able to mitigate this adverse effect of import intensity, and therefore able to generate higher level of productivity. So they are able to see improvement in productivity due to that knowledge transmission. See, there is interaction between you are importing, you are also at the same time, there are, foreign firms with some share in a particular firm, domestic firm. Okay, so we looked at that into kind of a measure at the role of FDI at a firm level. Okay, so I think now I can conclude. So basically, there are a number of things I discussed. There are so many papers, so it's very hard to summarize everything in a short period, short time span. So one point is quite prominent in all these results I presented, that R&D stock is important. R&D is an input in production, and firms, those who are doing R&D, will be better off relative to those who are not doing R&D. But if they have transactions with those R&D performing firms, they would still benefit. Okay, so the point, one point is quite significant, both economically as well as statistically, that R&D stock is always beneficial, whether it is your own R&D or if the R&D is coming from overseas, that I showed earlier with the considering international knowledge spillover, and that Indian data also we showed using, we have both imports as well as FDI. And after having controlled for that, we looked at the effect of this knowledge stock and knowledge spillover. Now, in the initial set of results I showed using OECD data, that imports and FDIs, they channel knowledge transfer between countries, but in that paper, domestic spillover was not statistically significant. And so therefore, we did that using Indian data, estimating industry level spillover, considering intra-industry and inter-industry knowledge stock for each firm. Okay, we showed that both R&D performing and non-R&D performing firms benefit from between industry spillover. Okay, so between industry, not within industry, because that is quite sensitive. It's not always statistically significant, so there is no strong evidence in favor of any kind of robust evidence in favor of intra-industry spillover. It is possible that the knowledge is already publicly known, so therefore nothing new to gain, and explain. It doesn't reduce your cost of doing business, and therefore it can't improve your productivity. Now, another point, this is very important. Intangibles are important. They do play a role. Okay, not just always tangible stock of capital stock, but intangibles are important, brand image and so on, trademarks, and these things are quite, and they were overvalued in the pre-crisis period, and which we saw in the UK data that it declined, the valuation declined in the post-crisis period, creating an overall negative effect. But when you do this analysis only for the post-crisis period, you find intangibles to show a positive impact for firms with higher level of R&D, higher level of patents, higher level of trademarks, and higher level of advertising or marketing assets. Okay. Additionally, we also have shown in some of these papers with my student that firms benefit from more intellectual capital by improving their managerial practices. And this concept is becoming important in the last maybe 10 years or so. There has been a lot of research on, what's happening in Stanford and others. Nicholas Bloom, they have been doing this research for the US. So managerial practices do matter in explaining firm level differences in productivity. And so obviously firms could benefit more from intellectual capital or knowledge stock if they have better management practices at the same time. So there are a number of mechanisms one could think about. So there are two such mechanisms we have explored. That because we know firms in developing countries, they are financially constrained, but we showed that both R&D and non-R&D performing firms, if they are financially unconstrained, so there is no financial constraint, meaning they have higher level of borrowing, okay? So, or they have a greater corporate board connectedness. If there is a board connectedness, information can flow from one corporate board to another corporate board. That information could make those non-R&D performing firms could become R&D performing, and therefore there would be knowledge transmission, knowledge spillover, okay, even within a country. And those firms, even within a country, if they are unconstrained, if they have greater board connectedness, they can still derive positive industry level spillover effects, both types, in intra and inter-industry. So my final point that which we made, because it has been shown in the literature that international knowledge spillover can make a big difference in productivity across industries, across markets. And this import intensity lowers, higher import intensity lowers productivity for obvious reasons, because it's a cost. And so if you have a greater flow of FDI into those firms or industries, they can mitigate this adverse productivity effect. And we find that evidence for Indian firms that only knowledge-intensive exporting firms are able to mitigate this adverse effect of import intensity with the flow of FDI into those firms. So obviously, I haven't pursued any analysis so far using a lot of the interventions which have taken place since 2014. And so there is an area where people should be doing research, trying to understand, whether these policy initiatives, R&D incentives, whether they have had any favorable effect in improving productivity of Indian firms. So I'll stop there. Sorry, probably, I don't know, I took a bit longer, but thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to take some questions if there are. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Mallick, for a very detailed analysis on the foreign knowledge spillover and local knowledge spillover and our performance. So, yeah, there are already a few raised hands. We can take those questions. So, Professor Varendra Kumar Bhoi has raised hand. Sir, you can unmute and ask your question.
I should.
So, good evening to everybody. Thank you, Dr. Mallick, for a very insightful presentation of this, knowledge spillover and productivity. Just I want to supplement your argument.
Yeah.
Just imagine in India, this investment to GDP ratio is more or less stagnant.
Yeah.
Growth is not that bad. We are doing well. So there is definitely increase in productivity, which is probably not recognized. So India is probably different from the global trend of slowdown of productivity after the global financial crisis. This is one observation. Second observation, you know, this fourth industrial revolution is more disruptive. Those who can assimilate, they can achieve productivity gain. Those who cannot assimilate or they are lagging behind, so they may lose out because it is disruptive. At the aggregate level, productivity is probably showing some kind of a declining trend. Possible. So in India, probably we have not understood the use of artificial intelligence in almost all areas. There are enough scope. We have not utilized this, fourth industrial revolution's capacity in a mass scale. That's why probably productivity is not shown as rising as fast as it is expected to be. So these are the two observations which I want to give you, because micro analysis is definitely good, but micro macro linkages is also very much important. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Nice to see you. We probably met many years ago. Yeah, when you were at RBI. So it's good to thank you for your remark. So I agree with you that the investment is important. Private sector investment. It was mainly we were relying so much on government investing, and private sector investment. Why it is not picking up is an issue. It is true. I think when the country is declining, you would expect investment to decline. That's easy to understand. But why it should happen in a country, so like India is growing, but the investment to GDP ratio, that is not reflecting that the extent to which you have higher level of infrastructural investment and so on. But is it because that public, I have not looked at the Indian data on this, but maybe public investment to GDP, that ratio might be increasing because the government is investing quite heavily. But yeah, so but at the one thing which I have always, when I was doing this research, people have mentioned that India doesn't do R&D, so much of R&D, and you'll find a lot of firms there is missing data, and so really you can't do a very good analysis sometimes. And they were not doing because a lot of the R&D was done by the government, so through their government departments and so on. And but now I think, given the way private sector is growing and there is technological startup and so on, so I'm a bit optimistic that probably it will start to take off. It might take time, but this could happen in the near future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Mallick. Professor Bankan, Mr. wanted to probably ask a question.
Sushant, fascinating paper as always. Sushant picks up very interesting issues and addresses them, and this is nothing new. He has the knack for that. Sushant, just two comments and two questions. One is, you talked about R&D. You talked about, how it helps the firms in difficult times. Soumya Das and I have studied that Indian firms, and R&D, as you said, data is difficult to get. We took brand equity. The value is reported annually. So we found that Indian firms with higher brand equity could face crisis better than Indian firms with low brand equity. We have the brand equity data. So you may like to look at that, as a surrogate for R&D and all that. This is reported at least for the top firms, not all firms, and all that. But so this is tangentially relevant to your issue. But more directly relevant is, I saw you've been talking about all this, FDI and all that. But small firms, startups, their share in raising foreign capital has drastically fallen in the last year. So till which year did you study? Your last year was 2023 or 24 in your study?
This paper, you mean?
Yeah.
This was published the 2024 or 3, I think.
So I think it'll be interesting for you to look at the startups share, in raising foreign funding, whether that has anything to do with knowledge transfer, because it was a drastic fall in 2023. It fell by almost more than 70%. So that's something directly may be relevant for you. So two more questions. One is, I believe, at the macro level, productivity is not properly defined. I mean, it's good that you brought in intangibles. That's a very common sensical thing one should look at. But the real options is not accounted for. For instance, suppose we develop something, suppose I develop a laptop. I'll say how many laptops are sold and all that, but this laptop could give rise to a palm top. That has to be somehow captured. How do you capture that? We track these productions. And I think, since you think all is fresh and novel, you should be capable of thinking that look, the real options, we have to bring in productivity. Otherwise, we could be underestimating productivity, because I think a lot of knowledge transfer is taking place and we're not capturing. And in that context, maybe I'm sorry I missed it. The J curve in productivity, which Bridgeloffson and all that have talked about in that NBAR paper, that initially, because the capitalists are being assigned and all that, we underestimate productivity and all that, then it goes up. It'll be interesting to see in the context of knowledge transfer if that is also the case. Whether we have a J curve or whether we have an inverted J curve, it's just interesting to look at it. And since I think you have enough data, you may be able to address them. That's it. That's all I have to say.
No, thank you very much. I think, when we talk about productivity, it's all about process innovation. Okay, we're thinking about improving the process in a way it can reduce, you can, maximize the benefit from use of those inputs, right? It's more to do with process. How do you produce, the method of production? But when we think about, sometimes productivity cannot capture everything. It only shows that to what extent there have been innovations in the processes that reflect a higher level of performance, right? But then on top, in addition to that, there is this concept of product innovation. Right? So that is where this R&D and this knowledge spillover, these things have a big role to play. And so that is I think that's why we need to consider them, because of course productivity is a kind of residual in some sense. And these are things we want to explain. What is it that is driving these differences in productivity across firms or countries or industries, sorry. And so for that, we need, if you are doing more R&D, meaning doing, to produce a particular design or product, so that will get reflected in your performance. So I think there are two types of innovation, process and product, so which you need to bear in mind. But ultimately, whichever it is, it will still show up in improvement in your productivity. So that total output, we are of course taking out all these factors like capital, labor, and material. These three things we are taking out, material cost. And then anything that, whatever is remaining is what we are trying to explain. How some firms could get that big gain, others could not. What is it? Is it because they were R&D performing, or is it because they were, they had knowledge spillover coming from other sectors or other countries due to their interaction with those countries? So I think that is how we can explain. But I take that point you mentioned in the beginning about this brand equity, whether maybe that would reflect intangibles, right? Is that... Yeah, so intangible. So you get that information for every firm. Is that right? Yeah.
That's correct. That's correct. And we found that they are more crisis resistant when they have intangibles. This brand equity.
Yeah, maybe that's a good point to keep that as one of the variables.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Really, there is need for more research.
So that we can't ever retire. I'm done, Amarendra.
Any other question from any other participants? Yeah, one of my students sitting here is going to ask you one question. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Hello, sir.
Please go.
It was a nice talk, and I just want to link your lecture with the growth theory that I taught in class. The first observation is that you showed that industrially developed countries, even the first world or second world countries, they have less growth compared to China and India like countries. Those are either third world country or in the latter period, those are trying to be developed. So solar model so that it is because of diminishing returns to factors or scales. Like over the period of time, when the factors will be exhausted, then the returns to scale will decrease automatically. I mean, the developed countries have already adjusted their factors of production, so they will be growing at 2 to 3% maximum. Whereas other countries will grow because they have that potentials. And after some times, again, Solo pointed out, it is innovation or technology through which we can again improve the production curve, or we can increase the productivity of those countries. But this debate again extended to the proximate and ultimate causes of growth. Here comes the question of innovation and or broadly the R&D. It is found that even in the literature at recent days, research done by Asimoglu, Robinson, they are showing that even if there is the proximate causes of growth within a country, like the land, labor, capital, organization, and including innovations and technology, but if the fundamental factors like institution, as you said, the IPR, intellectual property right, like patents and copyrights, if institution is weak, even if there is scope for innovation, innovation will not take place in this country because there is no incentive for the innovators or inventors or the investors are coming from outside. So my question is that for a democratic country like India, so what is your perspective? Is it that we are lacking that institutional strength in terms of IPR and patent rights, or innovation is actually not taking place in this country? There is a lack of scientific knowledge and spillover is not happening. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with your initial point about the factors why these developed countries are because there is not much return from those inputs, as you mentioned. That is correct. And so therefore there is a need for, in these countries, advanced countries, there's so much focus on improving that growth through innovation, technological innovation, and trying to. But what is it that they can do right now? These countries are now going into AI, artificial intelligence, right? AI, trying to introduce machine to do everything, not people. So therefore, cost of production will go down, and therefore they will become competitive again. Right? The way technology, computer revolution came in the 80s. I remember we were in college at that time. People were objecting to, no, we don't want computers, right? In the 86, I remember we were going on in strike, and when computers were coming to India at that time. And I remember first time I used a computer in 91, we were at Central University of Hyderabad. So you see, whenever there is a new technology, there is always people don't want that. But then when they see there are benefits, you can see computers have increased our productivity by so much, right? Everywhere around the world. And there are still the other poor countries, they're still catching up. So catching up is the is the key phrase that we use when low-income countries are going to grow faster. High-income countries, of course, so they will slow down with the same level of technology. Once they bring in a new technology, and they could again grow, like, US is growing, European countries are not, right? US is still 3% growth, which is quite good. But European countries, they are just flat, stagnating, all UK and all the other European countries. So this is being debated, how growth can take off in these countries. The only thing people can think of is innovation. But I agree with you towards on your last set of points about the role of institutions and governance. They are quite important, and they are more important in developing countries because there are not much institutional differences in these advanced countries. Okay, but there are significant institutional differences between the developing countries, and they are at a very, I think there is need for greater transparency, accountability. Governance has to improve, and maybe today digitalization has a role to play, and this is why I'm also thinking on these issues. And this is happening post-pandemic everywhere. Now there is a digital revolution. Everything is, and India is also doing quite well in that. All those indicators you look at. So my guess is, it is possible that this greater pace of digitalization could improve also productivity. And but I agree with your point with regard to institutions. See, for growth, first thing is macroeconomic stability. And that is something which got disrupted in the last 2-3 years, 22 onwards, because of this war and inflation and so on. And so that is kind of getting stabilized right now. And it will now the focus is going to be on these other factors like institutions, governance, digital coverage, because you can see India has achieved very high pace of digital coverage in the last some years, right? Probably last 10 years, you can say. And so that's going to drive a growth going forward. People are better connected now, and government has a better information about people, where they are, and there is a greater connectivity between government and people. So I think all these will take time. If we cannot achieve governance overnight, improvement in governance overnight, but it will at some point it will be. But that is critical. Protection of intellectual property, and better governance, reducing corruption. Corruption is another big problem. And so once these things are taken care of, so you don't have any barriers to innovation, right? And so that will get reflected in. So growth is a kind of final thing we look at, right? But there are many factors that can explain growth differences across firms. That's why you have this question of heterogeneity, right? Firm level heterogeneity in the literature, and we are always trying to deal with that to explain firm level outcomes. Okay, so there are a number of issues, but again, we can, but innovation is the key. But innovation, there are many types. We're talking about here like process, product, then there is social innovation, all kinds of innovation that can help improve outcomes for a country and outcomes for firms. Okay, so I stop there. Yeah, so maybe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mallick. I think since we have overstood the time, we would now try to wind up. So now I will request Professor Ravinan Pakkar, the President of Odisha Economic Association, to have his remarks before we continue. Yes.
Thank you, Amanendra. I will just say a few words, and we'll then wind up. So, first of all, Sushanta has made a good deal of amount of knowledge flowing to us in terms of his discussion on knowledge transmission. Actually, his emphasis on, he has reminded us of Schumpeter, the role of innovation, technology, R&D, knowledge transmission, and this is taking place through FDI and foreign trade. Then reminding us of the productivity paradox, the role of ease of doing business, then the importance of managerial practices, and he has shown how financial constraints limit R&D in low-income countries. In fact, what is important and what is special to Sushant is that he has ended with an optimistic note that we should be optimistic that knowledge will be created and knowledge creation will lead to knowledge transmission and knowledge transmission will help sustainable growth. That is what is important in this lecture. So thank you, Sushant, for all the knowledge you have blown to us. Thank you, the participants who have joined us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very
So,
much.
so I would like to thank Professor Mallick for giving his valuable time, because in fact the earlier plan was to give this lecture on 10th May 10th, because that is the birth anniversary of Professor Kshetra Pattnaik. But Professor Mallick was traveling, and so I was sort of insisting him that please join with us to deliver this lecture, and he kindly agreed actually. So I really thank you, Professor Mallick, for kindly accepting our invitation. I would say even in a short notice, and in spite of your busy schedule. And I'm sure that many researchers who have joined with us who would benefit and take up the issue that you have raised during the presentation for their further research. And then I would like to thank the son of Professor Kshetra Pattnaik, Dr. Sushanta Pattnaik. He has joined with us. I think he had some technical issues, that's why he could not respond to the question, but he is there online. And then all the participants, we have a number of former presidents who have joined with us, starting from Vanikant sir and Dr. Jugal Mahapatra and Professor Nirmal Chandra Sahu, and so many other former presidents who have joined with us, and also all the participants who have joined with us. And last but not the least, the president of OEA, who has traveled actually from Koraput. Nowadays he is working in Koraput. He has come to Niger basically. He is with me at Niger to basically attend this event in a very proper way. And yesterday we had another event on that was a counseling program for the Indian Economic Service. So I also thank my president. So with that note, let us close the event. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Sushant. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was indeed a great pleasure, delivering this talk. Thank you once again. See you sometime.
Take care, Sushant. Wonderful seeing you.
Bye.
Hope to see you, Liti, and everyone else in September. Give my best to the kids and the family. Good day. Riley.